Welcome to the third of a series of broadband discussions sponsored by the Southeast Nebraska Development District and the Nebraska Economic Developers Association. We've talked about what broadband is in the first episode and how crucial it is to all of the businesses and residents of Nebraska in the second episode. Today, we're going to focus more on the political and regulatory challenges that Nebraska faces. In our final session, we'll include a panel of ISPs, of internet service providers from across Nebraska. I'm Christopher Mitchell with the Institute for Local Self-Reliance. I've been hosting you through these panels, and today I'm going to introduce you to a longtime friend, someone I have a lot of respect for, the Chief Information Officer for the City of Lincoln and Lancaster County. Welcome, David Young.
Chris, thank you. Good to see you again. Always great to talk to you, my friend. Always great to talk to you.
You and I have been on panels around the country. We've talked about issues of urban and rural. Why don't you start off by just giving us a quick sense of what you've done or what the City of Lincoln's done? I know you're a humble man, so let's talk about what the City of Lincoln has accomplished since you've been around.
The City of Lincoln, a large team, a lot of people putting their effort behind this. In 2011, the City of Lincoln was ranked 24th, 26th in the state for broadband availability. Remember, Lincoln is the second largest city in the state, about 300,000 people. Created a broadband plan, executed on that broadband plan, and as of January 2021, Lincoln was number 5 in the country for download speeds and number 2 in the country for upload speeds. It's been a fantastic project to be a part of, really. And now we're looking at a program to take that same model and extend it to the rest of Lancaster County, connecting about 9 rural cities in the process.
And we'll be talking more about that with a service provider that the city worked with and truly a partnership with Allo. We'll talk about them more when they are on the 4th webinar episode. But for now, let's get a better sense also. I mean, so Lincoln is not really representative necessarily of a state entirely that is largely rural. You are going to be building out in Lancaster County to more rural communities, but you've had many more experiences with rural communities across Nebraska.
I have. We've worked with Ainsworth, O'Neill, Valentine, Carl Argenbright, great guy, great vision up in Valentine. We've also worked with some smaller cities in Missouri, but cities in California and in Oklahoma as well. And so this is a problem that affects both urban and rural, and it's just a different version of the same problem. It's just different obstacles to overcome, really.
What's your 30-second story about why this is worth policymakers really focusing on and trying to make better for Nebraska communities?
We live in an information economy, and it's just unevenly distributed, right? So if you want to compete for jobs in servers, architects, data, if you want to be a modern engineer and work on CAD-based plans, you really need to have robust, competitive, affordable broadband at your house to do that. COVID-19 really showed us that as a modern city, we need to be able to work from home, from the office, from mobile devices. The challenge really is for many communities is, do you want to participate and compete in the 21st century information economy? And I think most cities do. And they really want that infrastructure to provide for their residents and their young children to be able to compete and learn in a digital environment.
And we're going to be talking today about regulatory barriers and things like that, but I think it's useful to get a sense of what is happening in other states. States, let's not talk about Delaware. Let's talk about states that might be broadly applicable to the real life scenario for people living in Nebraska. What sort of states? I have a few in my back pocket, but what's one that you would start with in terms of looking at how things are changing out there?
I think Mississippi is often cited for many things, but one of the things they did in late 2018 is pass a bill that removed restrictions on electric co-ops from providing broadband. At that time, Mississippi was ranked 48th in the country. They have now received $150 million of CARES money, I believe, with a matching fund from the co-ops. I think the last time I looked, there's 25 co-ops building rural fiber to the home. Phenomenal. Mississippi is going to climb the ranks and be above Nebraska very soon, very soon.
Yeah, Mississippi is a state that I had in my pocket as well. They are,
Sure.
I think they have 25 electric co-ops. I think a few are still waiting to get involved, but yes, it's a tremendous amount, and they cover a large portion of the state. And actually, it's similar to Nebraska in that not all folks in Mississippi have public power, but a heck of a lot of them have power from rural electric cooperatives. And
another state's Arkansas. Arkansas passed a public-private partnership act where municipalities were allowed to provide broadband if they could not find a suitable partner to build infrastructure with. And you see an explosion of growth going on in Arkansas right now. Everybody wants broadband. COVID-19 has brought that to the forefront. And what they really want is fiber.
Yes, and that actually came, I think, in part because legislators were really frustrated with the pace of development of broadband, even with hundreds of millions of dollars from the federal government flowing into it. And so their legislature, in that case, I think actually voted unanimously to remove the barriers that they had to communities and public power entities getting involved in this space.
You know, Arkansas took a page right out of the BDAC's state model code. There's a lot of controversy around some of the BDAC stuff, but what Arkansas did was take a section out of it that talked about public-private partnerships and how to deploy broadband, and they adopted it as state law. I think they are seeing the fantastic result of that really right now in the amount of projects going on in Arkansas.
So are there other places that you think of immediately that are relevant to the situation in Nebraska?
Mississippi is a direct correlation, really. And Nebraska is a full 100% public power state.
I was just curious if I could get you to talk about your Oklahoma roots.
Oklahoma, you know, the city of Tulsa did a conduit system in downtown. It's been very successful for, 14 years now, I think. But the rest of the state is also challenged. There are cities, Muskogee, Oklahoma is one, great city, about approximately 40,000 people, does not have broadband. It would take about a year to build that city with fiber to the home. And so they are looking at right now whether they can find private partners to help them and maybe apply some of their CARES funding or American Rescue Plan funding as well for that project. But it's very similar.
Also, one of the I forget, it was Oklahoma Electric, and you know, someone really should have done their homework before just jumping into this interview with you. But they're one of the fastest growing electric cooperatives in the nation. There's more than 100 electric cooperatives that have gotten involved in broadband, and so there's just tremendous interest, and we're seeing this in Virginia right now, Southern Virginia. We're seeing a lot of cooperatives. In Georgia, we see electric cooperatives, and actually in Alabama, we see interesting partnership between both investor-owned electric utilities. I know people in Nebraska don't know so much about the investor-owned, but also in Georgia, we see the rural electric sometimes working with bigger providers. Even in that case, I think there's a partnership with Windstream. So there's a lot of interesting models happening around the country.
You know, once the restrictions to partnership are removed, and once the restrictions on municipal broadband are removed, the incentive for the private sector and the public sector to partner together to solve this problem really comes forward. Absent that partnership or the ability for the municipality to provide broadband themselves, absent a partner, there's just no incentive in a lot of these places. There's no incentive for the parties to work together, and that's really the challenge.
Now, Nebraska is one of about 17 states right now that has limits, both on cooperatives and on municipal entities. It's actually more rare to have limits on electric cooperatives and other private cooperative type associations. Limitations on municipalities are a little bit more rare. But can you walk us through what the current law is in Nebraska? I mean, you've alluded to this several times that removing barriers would be a good idea. What are some of the barriers?
Right now, Specifically, municipalities are prohibited from providing retail broadband. Electric co-ops have a very difficult regulatory hurdle to climb if they wanted to even have a conversation about it. And I think most challenging and the lowest hanging fruit is dark fiber leasing by a municipality or electric co-op must go through the State Public Service Commission in order to have a rate approved. And then the rate, whatever is leased out for, 50% of that must be given back to the state. How do you pay for infrastructure if you have to give 50% of the revenue back to the state? And who can afford small towns to go to Lincoln, Nebraska and hire an attorney to create a rate case in order to lease dark fiber? It really is a challenge.
Dark fiber, is that fiber that's laid by the dark night?
I like to refer to it as fiber that is dark.
Very, very illuminating of you.
I think more interestingly, it's fiber that is not being used, right?
So yeah, so if I'm going to build a fiber from my house to your house, I'm not going to put in one fiber just so you and I can play video games together. I'm going to put in 144, and then maybe 143 of them are dark, and I can see if anyone else wants to use them for a fee.
Exactly, and cities do this. They build fiber to their city hall and connect their health department. Schools get connected on this fiber, and under state law, all of those existing extra fibers are unable to be leased or with a very high regulatory hurdle. You have to go to the Public Service Commission. Love the Public Service Commission. I love what they do, but you have to create a rate case, get a rate adopted. That takes a long time, right? And then you have to give 50% of the revenue back to the state. How do you make a business case work if you have to give 50% of your revenue to the state? I don't know. I believe my understanding is that in the life of that bill, which was passed in the late 1990s, only 2 leases have ever been done.
Wow. And you and I have both talked with internet service providers that are private companies that would like to lease that so that they can focus their investments on communities, so they don't have to focus on getting 30 miles across the county that's already been laid.
Correct. And that's one of the big challenges we have is there's a lot of land, wonderful in our state, but the distance between communities is pretty large. Electric co-ops, public electric companies build fiber to all of their substations. And you're right, they don't just build one fiber. They build 144 count fibers or 96 count fibers. They don't use that much of it to connect the substation. And so that fiber is available, but right now the public power company has to go to the PSC and has to create a rate case, and then they have to give 50% of the profit back or the revenue back to the state. And they look at it and they go, why would we do that? Right? It's a burden. It definitely is a barrier right now.
Is it your sense that these barriers, they're barriers, if we got rid of those barriers, would we see that the electric entities were putting themselves at risk with risky ventures? What have we seen in terms of whether we should be worried about we're undermining the stability of the electric providers of Nebraska if they're suddenly allowed to get into something that's more competitive, something that's newer for them maybe? How do you respond to those lines of arguments?
Electric co-ops in Nebraska have been in business for a long time. They already have the customers. They already have the power at those particular locations. All of the farms have power. So for them to either partner with a private provider to use the backbone fiber or to do it themselves is relatively low risk, right? I don't think that argument holds water. They already have a billing system in place. They already have a relationship with the customer. They already have technicians on hand to do this. I think that by removing the restriction, what you would end up with is actually much more incentive for them to partner with the private sector, right? And if you use the Arkansas model, you can, and the FCC's approved model, you can set steps where the public power provider has to go through and see if there's a partner available and willing. And I think that mitigates all of those risky arguments that everybody makes about, well, they might go under. These public power providers have been in business for a long time. And they're very good at what they do. Very good.
So let's talk about what's happening at the legislature then. I mean, you and I have spent a lot of time talking about these barriers.
Mhm.
I know that telecom has come up on multiple different bills. I worry a little bit that you and I might have spent more time talking about those barriers in the legislature this year.
I love the legislature. I know that they do a lot of work, and they get lobbied a lot, right? And municipalities often do not have dedicated lobbyists to go in there and make arguments. Private citizens generally don't go and lobby their senators. Um, it's 5 hours. It's 8 hours from where I'm sitting right now to the border on the west. That is a long drive to come in and see your senator.
Yes, sometimes I think about this in the sense that like a lot of states have a Ducks Unlimited or some group like that,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And they follow what's happening. There's nothing like that for broadband. Not in any state legislature really. Like a little bit in California and in New York City where they have consumer groups that are more established, but there's not someone who's really representing the interests of residents, of farmer. Well, farmers have their representation, but there's
They
no
do.
like broadband group that is really focused on
Right.
working the legislature. I feel like that's always an issue.
Yeah, there is. If I remember correctly, and I'm doing this from memory, I think we had 12 broadband bills this year. One of them sponsored by the governor, which would create a $20 million grant program, which is needed and great. One that would raise the standard definition for broadband from, I think it's 4,000 kilobits right now. That's the state definition for broadband. It would raise it to 100 by 100 at one point. And so in order to receive funding from the state, you would have to be providing 100 by 100. I think that's since been watered down to 100 by 20.
But that's still right. That's still greatly in excess of the national definition of broadband that we are currently using, which is also expected to increase at some point this year.
And that's the argument, right? If we're going to change, we haven't changed it in 30 years. Maybe we ought to go ahead and change it to where it needs to be. Again, private providers can provide any speed they want, but in order to receive public assistance, taxpayer dollars, they would have to provide 100 by 100 and in new products. And overbuilding would be limited to areas that have less than 100 by 20. So that protects cable companies.
So overbuilding is a term that is used to generally mean using government subsidies to build a new network in an area that has some existing level of service.
Right. And I think the definition of some existing level of service is interesting. Is it? We've had several areas. There was a grant project last year that the state put out money in order to build new broadband networks. Originally, the standard was 100 by 100. The state was lobbied very heavily and reduced it to 25.3. And then you saw carriers that provided service, which was supposed to be 25.3 in certain areas, get grants to provide 25 by 3. And it was fascinating to stand back and watch. And we made our arguments that the standard should be 100 by 100. But this is the challenge with broadband is you don't have a concerted lobbying effort on the public side to say, hey, we really want this. Where carriers are definitely incented to have paid lobbyists lobby the legislature and the government.
As someone who's known you for a long time, I don't think of you as being a Bernie Sanders person. And I know that that there are people who are watching this who have, there's a range of people who have opinions as to how favorable or disfavorable they feel about him and policies that go by the name of socialism. Knowing you, like I think it's sometimes clear because people will read into these things. You and we're not out here to try and say, let's figure out how to destroy the big companies that have made investments in Nebraska, right? Like, let's just put that on the table. Like I think it's important to note that companies like CenturyLink, now doing business as Lumen, I think we feel they have not made the investments that are necessary for all of Nebraska, but we also recognize that they are not suited to it, right? It's like we shouldn't ask them to serve every last corner of Nebraska because they have certain things that they have to do as a publicly traded company.
You're exactly right. When somebody asked me to call them and discuss broadband master planning efforts, things like that, other cities, I'm the guy you call generally to talk about public-private partnerships. I believe that is the best of both worlds. Governments are used to investing in things that are 25, 30, and 50-year lifespans. Private sector is well suited generally to provide customer service, right? To get out there and make investments happen fast. And so when you have a public-private partnership, I think that is, generally speaking, some of the best examples of broadband deployment. It's where you don't have the incentive from the public side or the financial business case on the private side to build these networks. That's where they're not being built. Rural states like Mississippi, Arkansas, Nebraska, and Oklahoma, right? Kansas is another one, where you do not have the incentive or the financial backing to build networks 30, 50, 100 miles between a town, and that town might have 500 people in it. You can't ask Lumen to do that. And nor should they, because they're looking to return wealth to their shareholders, right?
Yeah, they're going to be offering gigabit in Omaha. Like, that's what they're focused on.
Right. 1.2 million people. Sure, there's a great business case there for them. The challenge is that in Nebraska and other states with restrictions, there's no middle ground, right? The city or the county can't partner together with another county and build that 100 miles of fiber and then lease it out to a private carrier to operate. That's not even on the table. So then everybody throws their hands up and says, we can't fix this rural broadband problem. The narrative is broadband's too expensive to deploy to that town. Well, let me tell you, broadband's a lot cheaper than that road we built. Broadband's a lot cheaper than those water mains that we built. Broadband's a lot cheaper than building electricity in those towns. But they all have roads, they've all got water, they've all got electricity. So that argument that we cannot fix this problem in the United States, one of the most creative countries in the world, does not hold water with me in any way.
Don't spoil the ending too much, because I want to come back to that discussion about how we can solve this problem. Spoiler: we're going to end this with discussion on an up note, so we're going to come back to that. But let's walk through for a second what was discussed in the legislature this year, as we know that this was it's quite a high priority for many people across the state.
Senator Brandt, I believe, had a bill that would remove all of the municipal restrictions on broadband. Another senator had a bill that would raise broadband speeds to 100 by 100 for state support. There's a really interesting bill. If you were given a telephone exchange and received public service to provide telephone exchange there, no one else could receive public dollars to support that exchange. Well, that led to some exchanges being supported very well, others not supported very well. And so there's a bill out there that would allow a municipality or a county to say, hey, we want to be a part of this other exchange. Please move the NUSF dollars or the exchange funding dollars to this other area and let us be a part of that area. I think that's fantastic from a conceptual standpoint, to allow counties to say, hey, we want to be a part of a different exchange. Maybe 30, 50 years ago when they were building out the phone system, it made sense. Now we want to cooperate with some of these other exchanges to get service.
So before we move on to the federal discussions, I think it's worth noting, you mentioned the governor advanced a bill to do subsidies to rural networks. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that's come up as I talk with people around the country about the different problems we face, one of the points he's made to me over and over again is that if we don't address the challenge of kind of the interstates, the backbones or the middle mile, the governor may be subsidizing much more than he needs to in order to make these projects viable. Because if there was more competition in getting the bits across the state, because the co-ops and others would be involved, we would see that these projects were not as difficult to make work financially. Is that something that you see?
The dollar amount that's proposed for the subsidy is not that high. To build the state would be a significant investment. And give credit where credit is due. The governor's office, working with the senators on the bill, has included a lot of these other bill items around increasing speed requirements, things like that. And so it is a good step forward. Where I would ask the governor or state senators to think about is that what we're focusing on only is the private side. We're not allowing the people who build roads and who build county bridges and who provide electricity to play a part in this solution. So we're really only addressing half the problem, and it's not going to fix the entire state. Will it make it cheaper to build cities like Grand Island and some of the mid-sized cities? Sure, sure it will. But will it make it cheaper to build one of my favorite towns, Mullen, Nebraska? No, it won't. It won't fix that problem for them. And so I think that that's where I would encourage our senators and our governors to think about, we provide roads to every city in the county. Electricity, every city in the county. We can provide broadband to every city in the county. And we don't have to do it as adversaries, we can do it in partnership.
When you said we there, you were the royal we of the private sector, the public sector, the
Yes.
co-ops, the everyone.
The city governments, the county governments, we can all work together to do this. And that's what the Arkansas bill does. Candidly, if you want a great example, the Arkansas bill says everybody will work together, and absent that partnership, the public can build their own network. I think they've found partnership everywhere.
What's interesting is right now, the federal government is going to be giving money to Nebraska in possibly between the time we record this and when it's released, but it's imminent. And the amount of money is almost every state is receiving multiple times the amount of money they've put into broadband subsidies in the past. And so it's important to get those rules right as you have $100 million or more. That's the minimum that any state is getting coming in for broadband projects, and then yet other sources of funds that could be used for this. And so this isn't something that we should work out in 2023. This is something that's really important this summer.
It is, and it's extremely important. And I think we have to get past the argument of it can only be provided by the private sector. That's a problem for smaller communities in Nebraska because the business case isn't there for Lumen to build those areas. It's just not. And nor can we ask them to. It's probably 50 miles from Mullen to the next town. I mean, going west. I mean, that's a huge gap to cover. How can we do that for 200 people unless we say we're going to bring all resources to bear, all the partners, the electric co-op, their fiber, the city, the county, their fiber, the private partners, their expertise. We need to divide this problem up and conquer it together. Absent that, right now, the approach is we'll just continue to fund private companies to do it, and the private companies will tell you it's really difficult.
What about a magic technology? I wouldn't just spring this question on anyone, but since there's history with you, I do think there's a sense, maybe next year something will come out and we won't have to worry about this anymore.
I've been asked about it a lot. I mean, what Starlink is doing is amazing with satellite technology. I think satellite technology will cover large areas. The question is, you're still not going to get over those basic fundamentals of physics: latency, cloud cover, rain. Is it important when you are building a competitive environment to compete in the information economy that you say we're going to rely on satellite to provide the internet? For watching YouTube, sure. For downloading medical imagery or having a real-time conversation with your doctor or providing education at home, I think it'll work. But whenever we have weather, we have that in Nebraska. I know you also have that in Minnesota. It's a challenge. And is it better to rely solely on that to compete in the 21st century information economy, or should we work together and take all of the dollars that are available and put in fiber? And I would lean towards the latter.
I really appreciate what Starlink has done 2 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
If you track down what I was saying, I was very doubtful. I'm impressed. And at the same time, I think it's important to note that they are not saying we are the future of broadband for Nebraska. They're not saying that. They're not making that claim. They're saying we're going to do a great job for the people that we can serve, but they're not telling states that they should stop figuring out solutions.
No, it's amazing. I mean, when you read the old Gibson quote, the future is here now, but it's just not widely available or distributed. I mean, Starlink landing rockets by themselves. It's amazing to watch, launching 60 satellites at a time. It's amazing. And I think that it will play a role in the future of providing connectivity to the hardest to reach areas, to the pivot that's located in the middle of the field. Yeah, we don't want to build fiber to that. I get it. But to the farmstead, if we have electricity there, we should have fiber there.
So we're gonna finish up our last big topic before we come back to the hope. People,
Sure.
beware. We're gonna come back to the hope. Um, which you've already stepped on. I feel
All right.
terribly that
Forgive me. Forgive me. I'm
um,
an optimist.
we mentioned that we have the American Rescue Plan is sending money to the states. You are the interim finance director for the state, for the city and the county, not the state yet. I know that you have some time that you sleep right now. Maybe you could do a little bit more productivity. Um,
I am not volunteering for that job, brother.
what are you seeing in terms of that? Like, there's real opportunities coming to everyone in Nebraska. It seems like with that money that's coming from that bill that Congress advanced and the president signed.
Yes, fantastic work by the Congress, fantastic work by the president. There is a lot of questions right now around what are the rules for the spending of that funds. I think maybe by the time this episode airs, some of that will be resolved. But right now, we're looking at it from a lens of how can we make the most impact in our community, which is why the county is looking at a broadband plan, how they can deploy fiber to all of the smaller communities in Lancaster County. And well, so to give you an example, Lincoln is top 5 in the country. Lancaster County was in the bottom 5th of the state for broadband deployment last year. And so how can we fix that? There is, I think, 30 miles, 40 miles delta between several of our small counties or our small cities in the county. How do we connect them together? And then the Lincoln model, the Lancaster County hopeful model, is that we allow private sector to provide service over that infrastructure.
Yes, because I think some people might be confused how you're building fiber when we said that you really can't do that. I suspect it's a conduit model, once again, as you did in the city of Lincoln.
It is because they are not addressing conduit leasing as part of the package of bills the governor's looking at right now. If they would, we would just build one 144 count fiber to all the cities and then lease it out to a private party and let them provide the service. But unfortunately, under state law right now, we would build a conduit.
So that's the American Rescue Plan. There's other folks who are, I think, feeling like maybe they will use the rescue plan money for other things, for water systems perhaps, or other things, because they have a hope that there's a broadband stimulus coming, which has been talked about and Congress is discussing. There's a Republican plan that's been advanced. There's a Democratic plan that is under review, I would say. So what is your sense? I've been telling people candidly, I've been saying, don't count on a broadband stimulus. Make sure you use the money that's available very wisely.
I bet on state governments and city governments generally to accomplish their mission. And I think when you look at it in the aggregate, we do a very good job at the local level. We do a very good job at the county level. We do a good job at the state level. I think that right now we could use a little more bipartisanship and putting the country first at the federal level. That would be my choice.
So I think if I'm reading between the lines, I think we're both on the same page in telling people you have a lot of opportunity coming with money that has few restrictions on it. Don't count on there being a lot more of it from a broadband stimulus. It's I believe that people in DC really want to get a broadband stimulus together, but I think that there are reasons to be concerned that it could be derailed.
It is a difficult topic. It really is.
Yeah.
Because there are people who are very passionate on both sides of the issue. And both sides have their point that they're right upon. My challenge is that when we work together, we can accomplish much more than when we argue and fight. And so I think that there's a lot of common understanding that we need broadband networks, that the entire country needs broadband networks. You look at some of the largest cities that are out there right now, they don't have fiber to the home. There's very few cities in the country that have fiber to the home. And yet we're talking about the rural and urban divide. I have friends in Omaha that live in very nice homes that get less than 25.3 at their house right now. So this is not just a urban problem or a rural problem. We have a broadband problem that we need to address, and a comprehensive set of policies similar to the 96 Telecommunications Act is what's required. Getting something like that through Congress right now would be extremely difficult.
And then the last piece I wanted to make sure we covered is something called the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund. This is an auction that the FCC completed at the end of the Trump administration. It was expected to be on the order of $16 billion. It was closer to, I want to say 8 or 10 all of a sudden. It's already been 3 or 4 months. I can't remember anything from that time period.
Yeah.
There's deep concerns about whether that will be making a difference in the lives of people in rural areas anytime soon. What would you tell people that are they're familiar with how important broadband is, but they're not going to get into really RDOF? What should they know about that program?
I believe that program is under litigation. The awards are being litigated. And so I wonder how long it will be before the money is actually spent. And will they have to have an RDOF 2 in order to re-award based on the challenges that are being made now? It's extremely difficult. But it was designed to build and was modeled initially to put a higher score on fiber to the home. Unfortunately, a large amount of money went to satellite providers, and there's a perspective that says, great, that brings in new technology. There's no requirements on there around, when that service will be available and who it will be available to, and I think those are the challenges with space-based technology. I very much support the technology. I think it's going to be amazing, and it will be game-changing to see the satellite technology come online. But I think we just have some more things to work through.
Yes, and so I think I would sum that up as a big cloud of uncertainty. Because as you said, we don't yet know if the awards are going to be awarded. There's a lot of questions around who will get their awards because there's a lot of technical claims that were made. And then on top of that, you don't have to build out significantly until for several years after you started receiving the awards, and you don't have to cover everyone until 6 or 8 years, depending on the area, until after you started getting the money. So I say all of this to bring it back to what you said earlier. I trust state and local governments. You really can't count on a federal broadband program to solve your problems locally. You really need to get involved, educate yourselves, and put together a plan, I think.
Let me clarify. I trust our federal government too. I think they're trying very hard. It's just right now the divisiveness between people on one side and people on another is a detriment to the effort. I think we can come together and work together. I just don't see that happening at a national level right now. I'm much more hopeful for states, and I see a lot of cities that are really getting the job done and putting the investment in. But yes, I think that any community that does not have a broadband master plan, it's kind of like saying I don't have a water master plan. Really? maybe you're a small rural community and you have well water. That's fine. But the rest of us would say, hey, broadband is just like road infrastructure. You have a 6 and a 10-year road plan. You probably ought to have 6 and a 10-year broadband plan, right? To make sure that everybody gets that infrastructure.
Now, you spoiled this multiple times, but my clincher, the final question I was going to ask you, is Nebraska doomed by its geography to never have high quality access? And well, unless someone's just turning in now, I think they know what your answer is going to be.
Absolutely not. Again, Lincoln, number 5 in the country. And we did that in the span of about 6 years. It's definitely something we can accomplish. I would love to say that Nebraska could be number 1 in the country. We need to change a few state regulations in order to make that happen. But I do know that we are, Governor Ricketts has made it a priority, and with the steps he's taking, they are improving the environment.
Yes, and I would just point to North Dakota and South Dakota, which have a lot of fiber to the home, largely because of the telephone co-ops. Yeah. And there's an interesting cohort up there, but geography has not slowed them down. And one cannot argue that North Dakota has significant density advantages over Nebraska.
No. I was looking at broadband rankings before we had this call. And depending on which website you go to, Nebraska is actually ranked 48th in the country right now. And before, this is according to Broadband Now, and people will argue the statistics. South Dakota is ranked 37th.
Yeah, and I've seen South
Yeah.
Dakota and North Dakota ranked much higher by the speed test. If you go by that, I think Broadband Now uses a range of perhaps advertised speeds,
Mhm.
um, and the Dakotas, I mean, have
Heaven
come in as
data.
in the top five at times. So,
Right.
um, so I mean, yeah, it's at any rate, it is you do not confuse number 48 with number 6, for instance.
No,
So,
you don't. And so it's exciting to be a part of the project. I'm very excited for what Lancaster County is looking at. And my hope is that all counties in southeast Nebraska and in the entire state are looking at this as an opportunity to create a solution that will last for multiple generations. You know, our parents and grandparents built the great dams, the great highways. We, in our generation, can build the internet superhighway to everybody. And I think that's what I'm excited about.
well, thank you so much, David. It's always great to catch up with you, and I really appreciate your time as you are collecting the salaries, I assume, of almost every director position in the city of Lincoln at this point.
That is not how it works, my friend. But it's a fantastic place to be right now. I'm very excited. And it's great to see you as always. Thank you.